Well, let's take a look at the other big news today with Sky News senior reporter Caroline Marcus and senior writer and columnist for the Herald Sun, Patrick Carline. Welcome to you both. New data from the Home Affairs Department shows that more than 2,000 asylum seekers flew into Australia in May of this year. That's the highest of any month under the Albanese government and comes close to the record of 2,800 set in 2018. Interestingly, those seeking asylum are arriving by plane from relatively stable countries, including China, Vietnam and India. Caroline, Dan Tehan says there are currently more than 80,000 failed asylum seekers still awaiting deportation. And last May, just a few weeks ago, we got rid of 11 of those people, sending them back to where they'd come from. For a government that vowed to lower migration, they seem to be sitting on their hands, don't they?
Well, not just that, but they just blame the former government. They say it's all Peter Dutton's fault. This is the legacy he's left behind. But it does leave you to wonder, James, what happened to the $160 million that they pledged to crack down on dodgy asylum applications? Because it's certainly what a lot of these applications sounds like. As you mentioned, they're from relatively stable countries, people who've arrived here generally on plane, on tourist visas or temporary visa holders who, once they're here on our shores, then go through the process of applying for asylum. But perhaps what's even more concerning that was in this report was that the government now has before it 416 asylum claims from people who came from the Palestinian territories after October 7. And it's not that people who are genuinely refugees fleeing persecution shouldn't be granted asylum, of course, but I just have concerns over how thorough the vetting process is, considering a lot of people coming from that territory were given temporary visas within days, when it could take weeks, months to really vet the security clearances that these people need to have to come here.
Your cynicism surprises me. You have concerns over the vetting process of a department led by Mr. Giles. I'm amazed, Caroline.
I know, what could
go wrong? Patrick, Border Forces intercepted a boat, 44 asylum seekers. They've now been sent back to Indonesia, though I believe most of them were from Bangladesh. But there's also news that people smugglers are using TikTok to spread the word on how to get to Australia, bearing in mind, I just mentioned Minister Giles, how badly the detainees issue has been bungled. Do we really have much faith in the government keeping control of our borders?
Well, James, the signs aren't good, are they? I mean, we've had 2 boats intercepted in the past week, and we know from the longer history of these things that 1 or 2 boats can quickly become 10 to 12 boats, like in 6 months' time or whatever. The problem is, if people think they're half a chance to get residency here, they're going to try. There's a long queue of probably tens of millions of people who would try if they think they're a chance. And that perception, aided by the use of TikTok and so on, is actually driving people to try. And so basically, you look at there was a boat back in February that the men landed on a West Australian beach. They weren't detected until they were actually on the Australian mainland. And the surveillance hours of Border Force were down. You sort of got to wonder, if people think they're half a chance, they're going to try. And that's the worrying sign here. This might be the start of something that gets bigger and bigger.
Indeed. Let's come back to home. If you like doing a bit of shopping on Anzac Day, you're in for bad news in New South Wales, where the Premier has just announced as of next year there'll be no retail trading at all on Anzac Day. Currently, you're able to go to the shops, Caroline, till after 1 p.m. Here's the Premier, Chris Minns, with some of his reasoning behind this decision.
It's an opportunity for the community to come together to acknowledge what has been a profound sacrifice by generations of young Australians on behalf of the country. And if we forget some of those basic tenets, if it's lost to future generations, if it's not commemorated on Anzac Day, then the essential character or the spirit of a country like Australia gets lost alongside it.
What do you reckon, Caroline? Good decision?
Well, look, I think think it's good to see a premier, a Labor premier in particular, talk about why it's so important to remember Anzac Day and instill those values, because I think it can be a bit like you spend the morning going to a dawn service or thinking about it, and then by the afternoon you've moved on if you're not playing two up somewhere. You know, you're doing your shopping, you're living your everyday life. But I also do think it should be up to businesses, I guess, to decide whether they want to be open or not. I mean, a lot of people are doing it really tough as it is. So if it's going to have an impact on the livelihood of people who run small businesses, then that's not a good thing either.
Let me ask you about this, Patrick, because small business won't be allowed to operate, but the NRL and the AFL in Victoria, of course, this is a New South Wales edict, but you've got major sporting events that will run. Is that a contradiction?
Oh, look, down here in Victoria, we've got the Anzac Day clash between Essendon and Collingwood each year. I think if you tried to stop that, James, there'd be a riot in the streets. It's part of the fabric of Anzac Day now. And I like the sentiment of Chris Minns here. He's saying, look, we need to remember, we need to commemorate. I'm not sure that closing the shops from 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it all sort of seems very 1980s, doesn't it? In the sense that, you know, I think we're past all that. And I think, you know, Anzac Day is dedicated to commemoration from the crack of dawn, literally, until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm not sure about closing the shops, to be honest.
All right, well, let's talk about another part of retail, and that's hospitality, because with the cost of living forcing people to cut back on luxuries like eating out, hospitality businesses are failing at nearly twice the rate of a decade ago. According to ASIC data, more than 1,500 cafes and restaurants shut up shop last financial year. Industry experts say soaring food and energy prices, plus rises in rents and insurance costs, are pushing more businesses to the brink of collapse. So, Caroline, we've got this weird situation, right, where the government are happy to put billions of dollars into renewables. We've got huge funding for quantum computers, and small businesses, well, they get, $325 to offset their power bills. How's that fair?
Well, it's not fair, but it's very virtuous of the government, isn't it, to force us all to use this type of clean energy while people are struggling to even afford to keep their heaters on or run their businesses, so it would seem. Maybe they can get one of those quantum computers to serve us our coffee and our lunches, and that could be the solution. But of course, that will see even more people out of a job. Look, there's been a 30% increase in average food costs. There's been, in the past few years, there's been a doubling in insurance costs and rent. It's just not viable for many people to continue to work in the hospitality industry. Add to that the skills and trade shortages as well. The industry warns that if the government can't rein in inflation, they're either going to have to, more people are going to have to go broke and shut up shop, or we're going to be paying $10 for a cappuccino or $100 for a steak. And I don't know what kind of quid you're on here, but I definitely can't afford a $100 steak and chips.
Doesn't matter what quid I'm on, I will pay any amount of money for my morning coffee, Caroline. I can't function without it. Patrick, just talking about, you know, the $325 sop to business for their energy prices. The government really haven't got much bounce from that money released to people on July 1st, have they? Everyone's sort of taken it, it's absorbed and forgotten about.
Oh, look, the last electricity bill I got was more than the one before and more than the same one last year. It hasn't really made any impact, has it? It doesn't feel like it's made any impact. It doesn't feel like you're saving any money with those energy bills. They just seem to go higher and higher. It's not something people are talking about. It's not something that people are accrediting for making life easier. And going back to what you were saying before, I mean, the cost of cheese has doubled apparently in the last 2 years or the last year or something. People don't have any money to spend anymore, and $75 off the energy bill isn't really making any difference.
Yeah. Well, today dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters converged on the University of Melbourne's Parkville campus to protest as the uni began disciplinary hearings for students who occupied a university building for 10 days last month. Now, don't forget, this is 24 hours after the Prime Minister appointed a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. Caroline, those students who occupied university buildings for 10 days, stopping classes, intimidating Jewish students, I mean, they'll be lucky not to be expelled. Why are people protesting the disciplinary action?
Well, I mean, expulsion is something they can potentially face in their disciplinary action. But look, we all know it's more likely they're going to get a warning or some other kind of slap on the wrist, maybe a suspension. They should really, a lot of them, be facing criminal charges, especially for chanting what are calls for genocide and terror slogans on the street. I mean, Intifada, as we know, refers to the two waves of terror that Palestinian terrorists carried out against Israelis in the 90s and the noughties. And to have people openly chanting that on the streets is outrageous. But the students somehow somehow say that it's about the university having some kind of Islamophobia or anti-Palestinian racism. So maybe they need the new Islamophobia envoy, special envoy that the PM's about to announce to handle their concerns now.
Well, I mean, that protest just looked to me like people trying to intimidate the university leaders even further. So on and on it continues. Caroline, Patrick, appreciate you both. Thanks for your time.